Caddie asked me to speak from two different organisations and two different perspectives, so I don't know if that means I get twice as much time or half as much time, but the first is Mana Taiao Tairāwhiti, so that's a group of residents that came together post-Cyclone Hale, start of January 2023, organised a petition and got 10,000 signatures in 2 weeks following sort of some of the pictures probably and concerns that the community had about the impacts of some of those industries in our community, and that so that first cyclone I think catalysed the community to mobilise, and then the second cyclone Gabrielle catalysed the politicians to take action, and council had certainly been on board with the petition, and post Gabrielle the central government got on board and instituted this independent ministerial inquiry into land use in the region. And the petition asked for that inquiry. It also asked council to change the rules in the regional plan around how the plantations are managed, and also asked for council to enforce the rules a bit better. They'd taken some companies to court, 10 I think or more, it's from 2018, but obviously it hadn't done enough from our perspective. And so since then there's been these enforcement orders which have required, so they've resulted in a number of court cases and companies having to demonstrate how they're meeting the very low standard from our perspective of the consents that they have for harvesting and things. And then it also asked for a regional transition plan, because looking at the state of the region, there was little confidence that we could continue to have 300,000 hectares in sheep and beef farm and 150,000 or whatever it is in pine plantations, given the geology and the changing climate. And as a region we needed to find other alternatives. So a bit like Taranaki's done with its oil and gas and dairy, sort of trying to find alternatives to those. And down south they had a transition plan where the Tiwai smelter is at Bluff, to try and look. We've relied on this industry forever and we need to look at what else we could do. We were asking for support for that sort of thing. And I think it's so this is sort of an environmental advocacy role, I guess. We felt like council's got that role, but it's often conflicted because it's beholden to economic drivers, and industry often, from our perspective, has a disproportionate say on policy and things, because they make threats that we'll lose jobs, and that's very true if we don't have a better plan. And it was also, I guess, Graham's and his mate have been the sole voice for nature in the region for a long time, and we need groups that would speak more strongly, I guess, on behalf of those species and ecosystems that don't have a voice in processes. As Kerry said, humans came along and did what we wanted to on the land and took out most of the indigenous biodiversity. And as a result, we're left in this region with very little. And then the deer came along and finishing the job off unless we take action quickly. And so just, sort of our perspective on those issues at the moment, we think this process came out of that as well. And then GDC also set up this transition advisory group that many of you will have heard from to date. And that was cool. And it's good to see forestry and farming and environmental interests and regulators coming together, trying to build consensus, because if we can't find consensus, we're going to have this ongoing antagonistic situation, and there's always going to be someone really unhappy with whichever direction. We've got to try and get some agreement about the scale and definition of the problem before we can really get those sustainable solutions in place. So there's been some good work done there with Kerry and his team, and we still think council's undercooking the situation a bit. They've suggested there's about 60,000 hectares that need to be retired from farming and pine plantations. I suspect it's closer to 100 or 120,000. So it's a very conservative approach from our perspective. Others in those industries would say they've been too generous with their land that they're trying to capture, and those are the tensions that we need to work through as a region. And part of that too is this undervaluing of biodiversity and sort of assuming that the land and the environment exist to serve our needs, rather than those other species that have a right to exist and that we've taken that right away from over the last 150 years. And I also think that perhaps the council and their advisors are underestimating the cost of this, and we know it's going to be expensive, and we've heard figures last week sort of suggesting it might be 20 million a year for 10 years that we need to re-establish cover on that retired land. There's also a bit of a push now for more exotics rather than indigenous cover back on there, not necessarily pine, but other exotics. Quoting the advisor to council, we don't want to cook the economy as we head to this nirvana state. Again, I think we just need to be a little more creative in the solutions that we're looking at. So on the other flip, put my other hat on with the time available. Hikurangi Bioactives Limited Partnership was a little company we started 10 years ago, Ruatoria, looking at what we could do up there for jobs and sort of building the economy, diversifying the economy. And we've got some scientists there to look at what's there, looked at things like onion seed because we're so remote, but then settled on kānuka because it's covering so much of the land already. Also looked at kina and cannabis and a few other fungi. But this kānuka research that we started 10 years ago is just looking like it's going to pay dividends over that time. And there was a bit of investment from, I think it was Activate Tairāwhiti back then, which was part of Eastland Community Trust, or not, and anyway, part of Trust Tairāwhiti. They gave us a little grant to help get things going in terms of developing a product from that kānuka, and we take the oil off the leaf, so we sustainably harvest the tree with just a portion of the brush, and looking for these high value products. And so we developed a cream for eczema that we put through a couple of clinical trials, and they've proven really successful. And now we're in a situation where a US company wants to license that, and it's going to mean setting up new extraction facilities utilising that kānuka, and hopefully it's just sort of the first cab off the rank for other products and taonga species that we can use, so that we're learning to live with and within the indigenous forest again, rather than relying on exotic species and crops and things. And so allowing people to stay on the land. And the volumes we're talking about, sort of, they're looking at retail sales of at least 100 million US within a couple of years. So these are pharmaceutical guys that know how to sell stuff, and that's quite exciting. But what Gabrielle did for us was we started off with a real focus on the Waiapu Valley, which is where we were living and interested with this enterprise, but we realised that these kind of customers don't want to have all of their eggs in one regional basket, so we're going to need to establish other facilities around the country in South Island and West Coast and things. So that's what Gabrielle and the ongoing extreme weather events have meant for that industry. We're still going to, there are a couple of extractors on the coast that we work with already, and we'll probably get to do one or two more, but we're also going to need to move out of the region because we can't rely on the roads existing or being able to even get up to the trees if we have more extreme and frequent events as we had. So that's sort of the good news story, and hoping that there'll be some more of that from others over coming years.